Hello and welcome back. My name is Ajay Naik,
And I'm Manasvi Priyadarshi.
and you are watching UI5 Scene webinar. And this is Games of REST API.
Yeah.
So this is the webinar which is very valuable because REST API is the norms which has become
Yes.
for the integration. And integration is the major part of any project, which can be like mobile app, which can be a big data application or machine learning application. Any application, there will be front end, back end, middleware, and there will be multiple middlewares.
And it has given the concept of loosely coupling all the technologies so that you can develop everything individually and connect them all together once you are satisfied with all the individual parts.
True. I think when it comes to dividing your architecture or planning your architecture in such a way that everything is in place, then REST APIs, or I'm saying REST APIs because this is what is going on nowadays, but APIs plays a major role.
Yeah.
And the modern days API has become the one kind of a database itself, because you can write queries with the URL itself, and you don't have to really go into the backend and really
Yes.
write those queries. Your servers will actually expose the APIs in such a way that you can query those APIs, you can get exact data, you can have filters. The performance in that case will be much better than
True.
what it was previously. So in this section or webinar, we will be going and showing you a 360-degree picture of entire spectrum. There are there's no seven kingdoms.
Yes.
So we will not really.
But we have three kingdoms.
Yeah, three kingdom. So let's get started. I think the first thing which we need to understand is the difference between a website and a web service. So I think the first and the foremost difference is it's a communication.
Is the communication. It's basically whom do the machine communicate with.
Yeah.
So if it is providing an interface for a person or a user like us, then you call it a website. But when it is providing an interface for a machine, then we call it a web service.
Yeah.
So the interface that we use for two machines to communicate to each other, that's what web service is.
Yeah, so I think when we are talking to a system,
Yes.
so we as a human being, so if I want some information, and if me, the guy who's asking for information, is a machine,
Yeah.
that's a web service. That's
Yes.
that's the basic
That's
bottom
the
line
basic
difference. Yeah.
difference between them.
So in a nutshell, it's still used for communication.
Yeah.
And can you tell me how this evolved? Because I think when we take an example of the modern days APIs, it's actually the backbone of the entire system.
Yes.
Or maybe I think nerve center of the entire system.
Yeah.
So how they evolve? Because when we go back to the beginning,
Yeah.
we can all understand how I'm getting Games of Thrones examples a lot because this is a
Well,
Game
you
of
can
Thrones.
give those, I think.
how the houses were formed and all. So so I think how it all started. We need to understand that. So let's go ahead and speak on a very nutshell. How it began actually, because when we go back into time and understand how it evolved, why actually we required the services in the first place, and at the modern days, if we see the entire application itself, the everything components, they communicate with each other,
Yes.
mostly with web services.
So to start with, XML was the initial standard. When HTML was developed, HTML wasn't standardized till a long time. But in order to make it a bit strict, they adopted XML, and since then XML has been a very robust language, and like this was used in communication a lot.
Yeah.
So it was secure too. So the first one was remote procedure calls,
Mhm.
that is RPC,
Mhm.
and XML based RPC was like the norm in the very initial days.
Yeah.
So it used to encode all the data inside XML, and then it used to transfer it over HTTP protocol.
I think there was also Cora and Corda.
Mm.
Those kind of protocol were there before
Okay.
SOAP as well. And I think those protocol don't involve communication over XML data formats.
Okay.
So what happened initially is, I think you were right. When we talk about XML, XML became a norm. I think it was just 5 years back. Everything was communicating with XML because
Yes.
previous to XML, it was just text files data and strings data to be transferred. XML gave a syntax where you can identify a document and can go inside because it was a tree.
It was a tree. It's
Yeah.
a tree.
Yeah, and then
Yes.
you can pick those elements and show it in your web pages. And
Yeah.
then I think it's the era of XML.
Yes.
And I think one of the major challenge with XML was there were so many repetitive tags that they have to come up with a better way of presenting the
it.
data, which now JSON is
JSON
actually
is the
taken
one,
care of.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, but then why? What is the difference between a RPC, XML RPC, and a SOAP?
So, what's the difference between RPC and SOAP? Okay. Well, the difference between these two is one of them is a very lightweight one, and it doesn't really uh, involve a lot of features. SOAP has loads of features. It's very heavyweight compared to XML RPC, and both of them uses XML in the core of it. Like it uses XML to encode the message and transfer. But one of the difference is XML RPC works on doesn't work on WSTL standard, while SOAP works on WSTL standard.
I think SOAP is stateful and stateless both, I think. So what I mean by stateful, stateless, that it remembers the previous time what data was sent, and that is actually stateful.
Okay.
So if I know what I send at time.
So the server is taking care of remembering what calls were made and what state is the client in
Yeah,
at that
true,
point
true.
of time. Okay.
So I think basically when we outline all these two differences, there was the mode of communication was SOAP after XML RPC.
Yes.
It was a remote method invocation in XML RPC, and then now the modern standard is SOAP. So
Yes.
now if we go in SOAP, we can actually talk a lot, and I think we have a lot of demos to show you, and all made of REST APIs, because this is what we are actually working with now.
Yes.
We do have all the APIs of an application built within RESTful controllers.
Yes.
And we'll show you some of the queries, how to write those as well, hands-on, small queries. And actually, you don't have to write it as well. There are tools which generate the query. You have to just drag and drop,
That's
and
true.
those queries will be generated. Okay, so when we talk about the REST, a small brief before we go into details.
So, REST API, as we all know, it's stateless.
Yeah.
First of all, it doesn't remember what state is the client in. Everything is taken care by the client. REST is very flexible in what it can encode. Like it can encode XML, it can encode JSON, it can encode XHTML too. So that's not a problem with REST. And one of the more important and very good thing about REST is you just have to define one API, and how like you can use it with any device. You can connect it to any device, whether you have a mobile phone, you have an app, whether you have an iOS app or Android app. Everything can communicate with REST API with just one server in place.
Yeah, I think one of the very popular way of implementing REST is OData, Open
Yes.
Data Protocol, which was initially designed by Microsoft.
Yeah.
So, and then they made it open source. And then let's go ahead and see some of the example of OData implementation.
Yes.
Some of the things which I think this is the one diagram. It's actually entire table structure.
Yes.
And this is a small example, not a small.
Yeah, it's a big example, but all these lines that you can see, I think they are the communications between them.
I think what this diagram is showing, this is the table structure of the entire how the database is actually made.
Yeah.
And what they have done is they have exposed those data with the APIs, and this is the final schema. This is the schema which, and you can see the correlation between 0 to 1, 0 to 1, and 1 to 1. So all these are correlation between key mapping, foreign key mapping. And what actually they have done is they have actually exposed this data using OData. If you go inside OData, and OData is actually an implementation based on REST API. So this is a very nice website which you can learn a lot about OData. Tools are present which will be required to have or write those queries.
Yes.
So if you open any of the URL, I think if you go in the top, in this page itself, so you open any, I think if you can open this one equal to, this is my favorite example where I can actually write queries as well. And so can you see, this is actually a XML format which you are seeing. And if you see the URL, if you copy the URL, I think, and you copy the URL and you put it in the any of the pad, like maybe Sublime, you can open it. Sublime, So you can open it in the Sublime and then we show exactly how these queries are written. Most of the time, what happens is if I have a service, that service is actually hitting a server or maybe retrieve from a server. And when those server will be giving you data, it can actually give the entire database if the network allows it. But then you have to be very specific that provide me data for the first 100 records or where the key is this. And then this is the certain part of it where you mention within your URL itself. So I think this is I think all the percentage have been replaced. You can directly copy from the website again.
Okay.
So if you copy the URL, can you see this? Copy the link and. I think it copied the previous one,
No. I think I'll just need to copy the text.
So, can you open the Sublime, any new tab? It's frozen. It's frozen. I think your server is serving a lot of people, and then it's kind of getting so many responses.
Actually, I've been shooting project code with this, so there's a lot of things running here.
I think that's a very big example. Like project code, entire services are being made with REST API based. So, okay, let me switch back till the time. I think you can show some of the tools, and we come back here. So, I think you are having Eclipse running. That's something which sometimes it slows your system down. Okay, so when we are talking REST, let's go ahead and understand REST before seeing any examples. Maybe that may be one idea. Okay, you have that. Let's. Can you increase the font here? Control plus. So basically, if you see here, there is a filter, $filter, and we have a simple query written, and you can have one query or multiple query written within the URL itself. And one of the things which we need to take care is when we are passing those information or data within the URL, we have to pass it with I think what are the ways we can pass data within the URL? There are actually two ways.
Yes, as a body and as a query.
So those are called as a GET request and the POST request itself. So if we pass all the information within the URL, then that will go in the GET request. And if you try to pass it within the body, then it's a POST request.
But then you also have to specify which method are you trying to use.
True. I think if you reduce it, because I think our screen is actually blocking it. Can you bring it to the down? You have to bring the URL.
Okay, I'll just. Does that?
So a little bit, bit better. So what happens now is this is a service. SVC, this is a very common service which people use to demonstrate the services and how to, maybe you are making any front end application or demoing anything. This is the standard service to go for because this is openly hosted, and you can experiment the services queries with it. Now, if I tell you to install a plugin called JSON Viewer,
Okay.
so, okay, one thing which is there is the data output which you are getting in your browser,
Yes.
it is in,
XML format.
yeah. And what you do to convert this XML into a JSON format?
Well, we use some tool.
Yeah,
That
we write a query within the URL itself.
Okay.
For example, if you go to the, yeah,
Okay, let
code
me
it,
go back
yeah, yeah.
there.
And then you have to say a dollar.
Okay. Just after that?
Yeah.
Okay, dollar.
And I think you have to append an and
Okay,
just
and.
operator.
This
Yeah, and dollar
dollar
format equal to
format equal to
JSON.
JSON.
Yeah. So and then you have to remove the space there. So
Okay, then, what
here
I'll,
I think this.
What I'll do is I'll just take this.
Yeah. And then it's hanging. It's not the fault of our server, it's the fault of our browser. The front end is. So imagine if you are having a very less product, like the systems is very slow, then your backend processing is separately happening. So imagine how productive or maybe how good it is, that loose coupling of architecture.
That's
So
very true.
this is, I think, a
And-
real case implementation here. So you have to copy it. Yeah.
Okay, and dollar
Format.
equals JSON.
Yeah. I think it's.
Yeah, I think it happened. So if I run it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you see the data format has altogether changed, and what you are seeing here is values, and within the values, those are totally in JSON. And most of the application, it can be UI5 or any AngularJS application which you have built, they all are taking care of data with the JSON.
Okay.
And do you know why JSON is preferred over XML?
Well, because it is much easier to represent. Much easier to
There's
view.
nothing to do with dragons here because so so I think okay, we will not give any spoilers for the Game of Thrones because it's really something which everyone is talking about nowadays.
Yeah.
The main idea is actually the file size, because those
File
are
size.
a lot of repetitive tags. And this is the tools to really explore or get a hands-on if you want to write any query with related to OData. So if you select any, you have to select one services which is exposed, maybe persons, yeah. Yeah, and then you can say where, or maybe
ID equals.
maybe I think you can just first do ID equal to 1. Okay, you can say I think it's
Should I do that?
yeah, 1, yeah. And then you have to say get data, yeah. So if you do it, I think it will give
It will give me
one record. I think this is one record
values.
actually.
ID 1.
Yeah. So if you remove those,
but
yeah.
if we have just given where ID equals 1, so there can be only one guy. So if I remove this and do a get data, maybe I'll get 20.
Yeah, because it's top 20.
Yeah.
I think some of the issues with OData is that sometimes it restricts the number of fields which you can get from the server to 100, and this is a very common issue.
Okay.
Most of the server like SAP NetWeaver Gateway, by default there is a setting where it will be only giving you 100 records. And then you have to change those settings as well.
Okay.
And this makes sense as well because from a because see when you have a server, those servers will have a gateway. The gateway will be the one which will be acting as a mediator between like it's
the server and the client.
Yeah, true.
Okay.
So they will restrict or they will be acting as application server for your backend. Maybe it can be an ERP or it can be an entire system altogether.
Okay.
And then they restrict how many records should go out, and sometimes those settings are by default present. So let's go ahead and then let's see what are other tools which we can use for a REST API, because I think this is the modern standard of web
Yes.
development. Yeah.
So I guess there are 3 types of tools that we can use for implementing REST API that will help you implement REST API basically. So one is like debugging. Once you have created your REST API and you want to debug it, whether it's giving you this correct output or not, the correct response or not, whether a request that's going correct or not. So one is for that, and then for the designing of the API, like, okay, what field should I put in there so that my API is correct. And one thing to remember about making REST API is it's stateless, so it should not depend on any other API. The API that you have, that should be self-sufficient in itself.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I'm calling a URL, then it should give me the result without taking the help of any other states. Every state should be taken care of by the client.
So the client. Okay, so you're saying that the server only. If I'm designing the services for my application,
Yeah.
then I should not really think how those are going to be used. I just need to
Yes.
expose the functionality. That's
Exactly.
okay. That should be the mindset of a developer who is trying to create the APIs.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think when you see any standard software which actually does that, like let's take example of our SAP HANA.
Yes.
So, and we have also worked with NetWeaver Gateway. The one way which it takes care is it has a gateway system,
Okay.
and in HANA it's an internal server, and those are I think in HANA you have to manually create the JSON data.
Okay.
I think we have created it, right?
We have created in one of the webinars.
Yeah. So there we have to manually create those data, and then those data will be then put in the body and sent back as a
Yes.
response. In the gateway system for ERP, this is like one of the popular example. You have automatically functions who does that for you. You have a
Okay.
table, and you can also have BOR implementation or function module calls where it will just pick up the data in the JSON, convert it in JSON format, and send it to you.
Okay.
And then based on those data structures or data itself, you can write the queries in URL. You don't have to write a words itself. Everything will be done internally. You just have
Okay.
to say, "Ki, I need this." So this is something which I think NetWeaver Gateway is one of the best example of how those implementation server can be built up. And
nice.
this is from my experience, I think.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's go ahead and see some of the tools which we can use basically.
Okay.
So we have basically two types of tools: CLI based and graphical.
Interface. That is for debugging.
Okay.
So, like one of the most famous tools for CLI is OData. I'm sorry, curl.
Yeah.
So, if you are from Linux or Mac background, then you must be using curl all the time. If you are into REST API development, basically.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying if I'm a API developer, I have to expose functionality of my
Yeah.
system as a API, and then imagine I have sent the APIs,
Yes.
and I need to test it. It can be tested in a CLI, which is command line interface, or can be
Yes.
tested with a graphical interface.
Yes.
But then
So-
when we talk about CLI based interface, I think is it not really, if you are not very knowledgeable about what are the functionality present,
Yeah.
then how will you actually
So they have their own documentation, like doing this will give you this output.
okay, so let's go ahead and see one example, I think.
Okay, let me just open a terminal.
Yeah.
So I have been using curl a lot, and well, that's kind of one of my favorite because it's very lightweight and I don't really need to wait a lot for
Yeah.
to I think I opened two terminals. Okay. So if we just do a GET request to Google,
Yeah, yeah.
so we can just say curl -i.
In Linux is by default present, or like you have
Yeah,
to
it's
install it?
by default present in Linux.
Okay.
So it will send you back the response, and it will give you the header for the response, which will have all the
I think this is something which you can also see in the browser if you go to the network section. Yeah.
yes, this is all the things that you can see in the network section. And then it gave me a HTML body as a response. Okay, so this is what the document has moved to google.co.in because this is in India.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it automatically redirects me there. So if I do curl on google.co.in, then it will give me a much bigger uh, HTML. And it says HTTP 200 OK, because that was a success, and it gave me a 302 because it was a redirection um, response.
True, true. I think one of the major challenge which we have while sending the data over network is they should be secure. I think this is something which completely big topic which we are touching here, because see,
Yes.
what happens if I'm sending the data to my server, and anyone who is inside, like no, maybe within the wires, if my data
Yeah.
is going within the internet, anyone can actually see it.
Yes.
So this is the same data. I think we can also show you or demonstrate. There is a plugin within Chrome itself called
Chrome.
Live HTTP Headers,
Yeah.
where I can see all the headers which
Yes.
you are sending. And I think if I know that you say password, what is the name of your field password, then I can also tap into your wire and use some of the tools like Wireshark to see all the data.
Yes.
So one of the major reason for using HTTPS protocol. So
Yeah,
these
the
are, I think we are
security.
touching the OSI layers here. We are just in the application layer. We are not going into data layer or any other layer. But for the REST API implementation, we have to be only present in the application layer.
Yeah.
But still, I think you have to provide a secure, you have to encrypt those data before actually it goes to your server.
Yes.
And that is by default done by nowadays any type of server, any type of good gateway which creates
True, true.
services, that's by default present.
So I guess there's this VPN around it, and then the VPN takes care of all those things. And okay, maybe I should not say it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think now the next thing which we have seen the CLI base. Now let's go ahead and see some of the graphical tools.
So there are two of the graphical tools, and one of them is very famous. That's Postman.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get an integration of Postman for Chrome, and this is where you can see. So this is kind of the user interface for Postman, and you can select the method that you want to use. And
Let's go ahead and like install it. I think you already might be having
I
Postman.
Postman.
So I think
But
it's
going to take a lot
just
of
take
time.
just say Postman Chrome plugin. Yeah, that's the only query you have to write in the Google, and then it will give you Postman. And this is, I think, de facto standard for testing APIs. I think everyone is nowadays preferring graphical user interface based. Some of the people still prefer CLI based, but like it's all we are not against any
something about me.
community, but like I specifically prefer
Well, I still use Vim as my primary editor. So
Okay, so I think this is the URL where you can actually go. You have to just say Postman Chrome plugin, and then if you are using Chrome, then this application will be.
I think it's already installed here.
I think all developer like at least should have this.
Yeah, it is. It is one of the very good ones because I have used it while developing an app, and yeah, it helped me a lot while development because I didn't have to write the complete query like I used to in CLI. I had a good interface where I could put all my bodies, the key and value pairs for each of the parameters that I needed to send to the server.
Yeah.
And it also had a history.
So I think okay, you already were testing out
Yeah.
our platform.
Yes.
Okay, can you space the same URL which we were having in the previously OData windshield?
Yes.
Northern
yes.
windshield, yeah.
We can do that.
Yeah. So before testing out any services, I think can you search? Yeah, metadata. This is
This is
something. Yeah,
metadata.
yeah.
Okay.
Can you copy it?
Is this a GET request?
Yeah. Let's check it.
Okay. Let's open Postman. And
So
okay, let's try
the
sending
first
it
thing
as a
which you
request.
do if you are using any service is get the metadata, and what actually I can see here is what are the things I can get from the service.
Yeah.
So it tells me like it can give categories, it can give customer ID and what is the format of it. It's a string or it's a number or what.
Yes.
So the first thing which you always do is get the metadata, and then you try to I think metadata mostly
Metadata gives you a good idea about what is there in the server and what is it that you need to retrieve from there.
True. I think it's mostly is giving you what are the types of field, or
Yes,
maybe
exactly.
I will say properties, because when we integrate with the front end, we call it properties. What are the properties which you might be getting in, and what are the format of the property? Because most of the time, this is a very common issue, very small thing, but it has really created havoc. That is the I'm not talking about Game of Thrones here,
No,
because
of course.
the thing is date format and
Yeah.
currency format. These are two of the main challenges which always has problem, and like developer fear if there's a date field.
I think lowercase, uppercase is also one of them.
Yeah, I think lowercase, uppercase, you can
Unless it has been taken care of while matching the fields. If I just send this category ID with C small,
True.
I'm going to get a
Typos.
null response.
Typos.
Yeah.
So typos are one of the second. I think typos are the number one mistakes. But
Yeah.
when you talk about having a
Talking
field
about typos, I remember making the
mistake in
mistake
few
before.
webinars before, and
Few
we spent
webinars.
20 minutes and finding out what was the bug.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Postman, and what you can, I think you can directly see the headers here. You don't have to really
Yes,
go
we
in
can
a
see
black
the
command
headers.
prompt and then bang your head. I think why we should use a graphical editor is it's when it's about sending a request.
Yeah.
So if I am testing out a service which takes some data, it can be a JSON data. Imagine like you have to send a request for update.
Okay.
So basically what you're going to send, you're going to send the new data fields,
Yes.
and you're going to say which query it should hit.
Yes.
And the query should also authorize or authenticate you. For
Yeah.
example, it should first of all understand that you are the right person who is sending it. The second thing is it should also understand that you have the proper privileges to really change a record, because you can actually change a banking record also and adding $10 million into your account. So
How
you
can
never
you
know.
do
REST-based APIs. So this is necessary to check that you're the right person,
Yeah.
and you have the right privileges to change the record. It can happen if I'm transitioning, and then I'm using an API, and I call the proper API with the proper, and I fool the server that I'm the right person, then I can actually become billionaire within a day.
I guess that's how frauds happen in those banks, and they develop their system to be more robust.
True. I think
Okay.
what you have to do is if you select post here, so
Okay, if I select post here, then
yeah, post or
I'll-
put, then I think you have to send your first of all you have to send your headers CRPF token,
Yes.
cross-site forgery detection. It's
Yeah.
a very big name. CR.
Cross-site forgery detection, CSRF.
CSRF. I think I have worked on this extensively, but still I cannot pronounce the name. CSRF token. CSRF tokens check if you are the right person, because what happens is initially if I open a web service from a server, then I get a CSRF token which is stored in my cookie or the browser, and then again the next time I call, it checks my CSRF token and sees if the session is open or not.
Yeah.
So this is one type of security detection in the REST API. And the name of the webinar, why we are saying it Game of Thrones, because if you really go into the implementation level of a API, it's all messed up.
Yeah.
But still it works. Still it works, everyone.
Okay.
So that is the main idea. Okay, so this is I think the tool which we normally or de facto standard for testing a API, Postman. And it's not about sending mails, but testing APIs. Okay, I think you have also mentioned Charlie's.
Charlie, yeah.
Yeah.
So Charlie is another one of the tools. So I think not Charlie, Charles
Yeah.
proxy. So this is, I guess, a paid version, and you can download a free trial here.
Free trial. Life running on free trial.
So
Imagine that.
this is also one of the tools where you can see everything happening in a graphical way. You'll see the content, you'll see the headers, cookies,
It looks like
response.
little development and development environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I can see the file and then I think Postman is. I will stick to the Postman. Okay,
Yeah.
so MIT M proxy. This is a CLI.
MITM proxy is the CLI version. Charles is just the graphical version of it. I mean, I wouldn't say they are the same, but okay, they do the same things basically.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So this is developed by MIT, I guess, maybe.
I think.
Oh,
So
okay.
MITM proxy is basically for like tapping into the data that's flowing.
Yeah, I think tapping into data. I think some of the popular tool I can tell you if you can check it out is the best one is Wireshark,
Wireshark.
developed by Stanford University. And the second is Canonable.
Yeah.
Canonable is an entirely hacking tool, and then you can try it out. But I think Wireshark is my favorite for testing out the data in
Yes.
Wire. Okay, so let's talk about designing an API because I think I've never heard about this tool.
Okay, so designing of API is like what should be the architecture of the REST API. Now, one of the things that you should know about REST API is whenever you are creating a URL for it, then you should make it in a directory-like structure.
Okay, yeah.
So, if it's something related to date, like what was the weather at a specific date, then you should have the year, then slash month, slash date, and then the specific city or something like that. So if you have a pattern like that, then it becomes very easy for you to manage everything.
Okay, so you're saying the pattern as an output, or should I
The
provide?
URL.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you show something like maybe?
So if we go into one of these tools, I think I'll just show you API blueprint. And by the name, you can imagine that it is for creating a blueprint for
Yeah, yeah.
for the
API.
API. Yes. So you design the data structure, like how would the
Fields.
be. So we have ID here and a number, and you specify whether it's required or not. And okay, that's how you create your own body and queries. And then you define the responses, like how should the response be, which type should it be. So, well, that's how you like completely define, okay, these are going to be the parameters for my API, this is going to be the URL for my API, and this is how I'm going to um, build the API. So it is basically a tool for building the architecture for the API.
Okay, so when you talk about the architecture of the API, is it one API or the collection of APIs?
Many APIs, like all the APIs that you are trying to make.
True. I think I have experience. I think from my enterprise, and I have experience with I think those two thing, HANA and then Gateway.
Yeah.
I think Gateway we have Service Builder itself, and it's a wonderful tool because see, I think we are getting to the next section here. When you are trying to create an API, then what basically you're providing is a CRUD implementation of it.
Yes.
So it should have a CRUD queue, we say it, because then there is a query also.
Yeah.
So create, read, update, delete.
Yeah.
This is CRUD, and then query is just to query and select operation where you have filters as well.
Yes.
So these are the basic things which should be included in an API, which is kind of exposed for any application developer. So when I was making those APIs using the service builder, then the interface or the software itself was designed in such a way that I have to just follow the software, and I would say that I want to create a API, name of the API, and it would automatically create those frameworks where I have to write and implement those codes or ABAP codes because you have to write ABAP within the SAP to retrieve those data.
Yes.
I think you can check our gateway course itself where we have covered those topics
things.
in details. And we go inside, we write those particular codes, and when I test it, I can test it within the server itself, or within the gateway itself, or I can just test it within my Chrome browser itself if my gateway is allowing that.
Okay.
So first of all, you have to allow the gateway to really speak to outside world. So some of the softwares are there which are integrated with the gateway, which will act as a design and development tool itself.
Okay.
So as a developer, you don't have to do much of work. You have a framework automatically created. You go in specific places and you say, okay, what is the create record or maybe create functionality? What should it invoke? What functionality? I need to create some tables. I need to put data there.
That's great.
Yeah, so these are some of the tools which should be integrated within the server itself. And even in Henna Studio, there was a time when people were actually doing all the designs
Okay.
within the Eclipse itself and Eclipse Designer, and then they used to just say, "This is my table structure." The table structure which we saw, I think if you go there, we already saw that very fancy, little complicated table structure. If you go back, yeah. I think you might, yeah, diagram, I think. So this structure would be something which I would design in Eclipse itself, a builder. And then I would say, okay, I need all the structure to be similar to this and queries which are linked to each other. And proper frameworks or the places would be produced where I could write those particular codes. Because at the end, you have to, as a developer, write those codes.
Okay.
Some of the gateway don't allow sometimes gateway systems allows you automatically creation of the codes which gets those records specifically, but I think imagine if you are having 100 tables, query has to know, okay, which table you need, which particular fields you need, when you need it, so those are to be manually coded. So even if it provides a framework for you to fill those gaps, but you have to at the end go and then write the specific codes there.
Okay.
And
But it gives you a good framework of like what needs to be done so that it's easier for you to translate it to code.
true, because
Yeah.
see, as a developer, we are good at writing codes, and we should not be really spending time on managing all those things. If the
Yes.
tool itself does it, then it's a good tool. Therefore,
Exactly.
so I think at the end, one thing which I would like to add here is certain bit of disclaimer, not disclaimer, I will say, certain bit of warning message here is whenever you are exposing your services as APIs, then you have to be very careful on time it takes,
Yes.
because there are two type of time or three types of time which can it take is, first of all, you are retrieving those records or maybe doing some database operation. The second is those records are transferring from the network to your end. And the
Yes.
third thing is like if your application is binded with the data, then the binding latency is also there. So
Okay.
three types of delay happens before a user actually sees anything in the application. If you have made your entire application with the API based. So all the major bottleneck sometime is actually retrieval of the records, and this is where you have to spend a lot of time.
Yeah.
And there are
You have to
applications which
optimize it a lot.
yeah, true. So in the project code itself, when we are making those services, we are making sure that we are pushing the computation if we are using SAP HANA to the HANA end. So the time
Yes.
it takes to really process those records are very less.
True.
So time, how much time it spends, everything is done on an optimal basis, so that later on, if I want to add more functionality to the same call, I could do it. Okay, so these are all the top main experiences which I have. And finally, I think this is monitoring of the API.
This is like completely end to end. I mean, are different. This is not for, I guess, developers. This would be more for the managers and all, because it gives you all the analytics and alerts in case something is failing, or how like what is the traffic going on, and
Okay.
those sort of things. So these three are like one of the top uh, tools to monitor the APIs, like how is it working, how is it there in the production environment. So if you need monitoring API tools, then maybe you have already made your app live with all the APIs exposed, and then you want to see how is it behaving.
True.
So these are the tools to manage those things.
So I think if I have sometimes we buy some subscription
Yes.
of any service, and they will tell you how. For example, we are using Mixpanel for our
Yes.
analysis of how many people are there in the platform, what they're doing, what they're not doing. So all those are API based communication.
Yes.
So in those actually dashboards, they have a limit on how many numbers of API call can this guy have within that plan. So sometimes if I'm selling commercially my services or platform,
Yeah.
maybe for data analysis, we use Mixpanel for data analysis, and then they have a cap on how much this particular user can
Yes.
see before we cancel their free plan.
True.
So this is a very common tool. We can specifically see how many API calls has been done from Mixpanel to our website, which is ufcn.com.
Yeah.
And based on number of calls, I think we have around 10,000 calls. Once we reach that calls, then they stop the service.
Yes.
Then we have to actually pay to really go and see more services.
Yeah.
So those are important because some of the business decisions or maybe your business proposal for like how much money you should take can be the call based. Like Google
Yeah.
Cloud platform sometime I think ask you that okay, it will allow only 100 calls. I think we have seen in the maps itself when we are shooting the advanced codes
Yes.
for UI5. Google Maps logins, I think.
Yeah, it limits your number of calls
Yeah,
you can
true.
do per day or per month. Like there is a
Yeah.
limit
Per day you
per
can
unit
call
time
10,000 calls for the map for free.
for free.
Yeah. After that, you have to actually buy the APIs. It should be a paid service. For example, if
Yes.
I'm Uber or Ola in India or any other cab services, then if I'm just running on the free account and I'm doing like
Yeah, you can't do that.
5 million
Yes.
calls per day, it really, you should actually pay something to them as well.
And like there's a constant update of location too, so that's like constant calling of APIs.
True. So sometimes the business decision entirely based on monitoring of the APIs, and therefore it's very crucial when you are going to a B2B or B2C market, and you are trying to have a checkpoints on how many numbers of calls has been made.
Yes.
Okay, so basically this is the entire the games of API, and I think most of the time as a developer I spend while designing the API and then debugging the APIs. I think if
The
we
fastest way to development is like planning out everything. Okay, this has to be done here, this has to be done there, and once you have everything in place, okay, now you can just refer to that and code it.
So I think finally before going, also you can check out our courses on ufsc.com, and I think we are giving a 80% off with Go Get It coupon.
Go get it.
And become a Prime subscriber so you can get access to the project core where we are actually building this enterprise-based project, all the
Yes.
end-to-end components built from the scratch. And I think the next week we will be showcasing the application. I think it's almost done. We are just doing the testing here.
Yes.
And then we will showcase the application which you will be actually building as well. So before going into for this week, like what is your best experience while working with any APIs?
Okay. Best experience is, I think when it works, every time it works.
So any services which you have specifically used and like that you think that is the best way of implementing? It can be like Facebook Graph APIs or Google's Map APIs.
Well, geolocation API.
Geolocation API.
Geolocation API that I have used while creating an app to determine the location and also geofencing.
Okay, yeah.
These are the two things that I found really interesting, and it's just really interesting how they work on it. I mean, you would never really imagine that okay, this can be used for doing this. Okay, so
Yeah.
that kind of feeling was what I had while using geolocation and geofencing APIs.
So this was from the Map APIs of the Google, I think.
Map APIs of Google.
Yeah, I think for me it was Facebook Open Graph APIs.
Yeah.
I think Map APIs is very nice and easy to use, but Open Graph APIs I would give this to the Facebook because it was having so much information, not maybe like a map, but most of the information are text based, and then you could actually access it. The authentication was smooth, and the documentation was simple, and no one actually have explored much on Facebook Graph APIs, but it can actually do a lot if
Yes.
you can try out. The editor which Facebook provided when they exposed the API was very simple. It was like a Postman where you can
Okay.
try it out all the APIs.
So was it when you were exploring React.js?
Yeah, similar to
Yeah.
that time
Okay.
interval. Yeah. So that is one of my favorite. Yeah. Okay, so I think with this we come to the end of the webinar. It was like a discussion mostly
Yeah.
and sharing of experiences.
Well, we'll talk a lot more about REST APIs in Project Core,
Yeah.
where we will be having actual implementation of it, where we will be building the architecture and all the URLs and everything. So, well, you can think of it as a trailer to that. Yeah.
Not
But,
trailer. I think this is the independent sharing session of entire
Yes.
experience because REST API is the backbone of the modern day application
True.
building, and understanding what not to do with REST API is more important than what to do, because a bad app is like no waste of time and waste of money. Okay, so see you the next week. Until then, learn simple.
Learn simple.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.